Welcome, Lara Adler, to the Essentially You podcast. How are you doing, girl?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be back here chatting with you.
Oh my goodness. I am so happy. I was thinking about we need to cover this topic. We're talking about everyday detoxification. And when I think about all the scaries in the world, how to manage a lot of the toxins in the
You think of
world,
me.
I always think of you. And
Right.
I love you so much, as you know. And so I'm really excited to be able to have you share some of your big takeaways regarding what we can do on the daily to significantly reduce probably one of the biggest root causes of disease today, which is
Yes,
toxins.
absolutely.
So girl, how did you get into this? You are my environmental toxins expert. You are when it comes to the research, it comes to the science, you're like a bulldog for it. What inspired you to do this work?
The short version is just seeing an incredible education gap in this area amongst the health professionals that are out there, boots on the ground, doing the work, working with people on diet, lifestyle issues, transformations, and people that are working with those that are dealing with some kind of chronic health issue. There's a significant education gap around environmental health. And the more I started to learn about these connections between these chronic low levels of every single day, day in, day out exposures to chemicals in our food and in our personal care products, and how the research is showing that these exposures are being linked quite convincingly across the literature spectrum of all of these different diseases that people are dealing with, from developmental issues to eczema to Alzheimer's to cancer to fertility issues. The research is there, but it just wasn't making it into the conversation that people were having with their clients and with their patients and on their own health journey around, getting better. And that really struck me as a very sort of gross oversight and a tremendous missed opportunity to address something that can really alleviate a lot of the burden that our bodies currently have to live in this world.
And do you think, kind of recognizing that gap, was it possible that any of us or some of us were trying to ignore some of that?
Certainly. Yeah, because it's like, the big black cloud. Like I jokingly say, I can clear a room, I can ruin any fun thing that you're doing because I know a lot of things. I try not to do that, of course, but I definitely think that there is a lot of sticking your fingers in your ears and kind of, no, I don't want to know about it, because it's a big beast to slay. It's once you kind of start going down that rabbit hole of looking at the way, chemical X affects us or chemical Y affects us, what ends up happening is that this whole world kind of, opens up to you, and that world is scary, and it certainly can force us to face some of the habits or behaviors that we've developed over our lifetimes. And, we have to look at that and say, is this something I want to continue to do or not? I think that there's certain pockets of this environmental health conversation that elicit more of the I don't want to know about it. That's certainly, I would put EMFs into that category, because people are not tell me that I need to change the way that I use my devices, right? So there's definitely a lot of resistance in that realm, but more broadly speaking, I just think it's an overwhelming topic. And I think that the rabbit hole is very deep. And, at least with the practitioner audience that I see, they're really busy running their practices. They don't have the time always to do that research. And then for the consumer, the non-practitioner, it's so dense and technical and complicated, and they feel like they need a PhD in order to even understand this conversation. And I think that really keeps a lot of people away from even looking at it. And then there's certainly going to be people that just disbelieve that it's an issue at all. And, I think there is certain willful ignorance in that space, which, isn't going to help us in the long run.
I hear all of that. And I agree. And I can imagine, and even as I have dug into this, nowhere near to the extent you have, it absolutely becomes a big rabbit hole. And I know today our goal is to really not only create clarity, but also, how do we start to chip away at this? How do we begin to create simple steps and simple ways in order to support our bodies so that we're thriving for as many years as possible, so that our brain is functioning, we feel good, we've got the energy, our mitochondria are happy and they're not going in major hibernation mode because they are feeling like there's toxins all around them. Stranger
Right.
danger. Like there's toxins all around them. Stranger
Right.
danger. So I
Yes,
think of little
completely.
mitochondria just like, what do I do? Okay, so let's talk about what is a toxin. Because
Right.
I know so many people are like, okay, parabens, pesticides, glyphosate, DDT. I mean, there's so many things out there.
Yes.
Talk a little bit to me about what they are. What is
Yeah,
this?
so that broadly, so I'll kind of look at it from two different perspectives. So technically speaking, from a very technical standpoint, a toxin is actually something that is produced by or derived from a plant or an animal. So in the field of environmental health, when we are talking about synthetic man-made chemicals like DDT or parabens or phthalates, what we're actually talking about are what are called toxicants, toxins versus toxicants. Generally speaking, these words are lumped together. Some people like to make clear that distinction. Generally speaking, what we are talking about are merely substances. Doesn't matter if they're natural or not, because mercury is natural, lead is natural, that these substances, chemicals we'll just call for short, have some kind of negative, toxic, detrimental effect on the organism of the human or of animals or in the environment. And so very broadly speaking, that's what we mean. Now, another sort of layer of clarification there, in this space of environmental health, we want to make clear that what we're talking about are not all chemicals, but chemicals that the research suggests causes harm. And we have to recognize that technically everything is a chemical. And so we don't want to step into this conversation thinking like, quote, chemicals are bad, because our hormones are chemicals. The air we breathe is a chemical. The
Emotions.
everything is chemical. And so we just want to be a little bit more precise about that language. And, in this conversation, it's implied that we're talking about chemicals that can cause harm. Mm-hmm. Another layer of sort of defining what we mean by toxic is not necessarily something that is acutely toxic, meaning you get bleach in your eyes, you have to go to the emergency room, you have to call poison control because your kid ate a laundry pod or something like that.
Don't do that. Yeah, we don't want to do that.
That's
people
a
totally
real
do that.
I know.
All of those things happen.
All those things happen, yes. And so those are acute toxicity issues. Somebody has a very acute, immediate response, whether it's a skin blistering or whatever, something that's an emergency situation. It's generally not what we see in this space, but what we see instead is this chronic exposure to low levels of toxins that sometimes the symptoms, one, get confused with other things, or two, they might take 10, 20, or 30 years to manifest in a disease. And so it's really just looking at toxicity from a different perspective. We're not looking at acute toxicity. We're looking at the sort of slow, heavy rock on the chest of our health that is suffocating us and will end up in, can lead towards increased risks of X, Y, and Z conditions. And so that's really what we're talking about in terms of what do we mean by toxicity? What do we mean by toxic chemical? We're just looking at this massive array of things that we encounter in our lives by, waking up in the morning, washing our hair, getting dressed, making breakfast, getting in the car, driving to work. These exposures are happening in small amounts. Any single amount is generally not meaningful, but it's the collective, cumulative load that we're dealing with that can become meaningful for people. Yeah.
Well, and it really does lend to the fact that we are relatively resilient. I mean, the fact that we can work with what we got right now, in the circumstances that we're in. However, like you said, it's an accumulation over time. The body just wears down. Over time, our cells lose their resilience. And that's when we start to see problems.
And it's also that we now are dealing with toxic chemicals that our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents did not ever have to encounter. And so it's a miracle that, we're all functioning and many of us are thriving, and that's great, but it's not certainly due to any exposures to chemicals. I think that if we eliminated that, the bar would be raised in terms of what we would consider normal, healthy. But, humans nowadays, animals, wildlife, are dealing with magnitudes more synthetic man-made chemicals, poor nutrition, more stress than previous generations. And so our bodies are kind of reaching this limit of what it's able to do, right? It's really kind of under its thumb right now. And that's, I think, why we're seeing lots of spikes in chronic illness.
Well, spikes in chronic illness earlier in life. We
Yes.
really are
Yep.
seeing that more than anything. So let's talk about, when we talk about toxins, we talk toxicants, whether what the man-made. I think mostly the man-made ones are definitely higher and more proliferative than I think about someone eating, a bark that they shouldn't be consuming, or some type of plant-based thing. So clearly we talked about, you mentioned cancer, autoimmune condition, developmental issues, reproductive issues, obesogens,
Yes.
storing of fat, or literally shutting down our metabolic hormones. Talk to me about exactly what is happening inside of the body that these toxins are basically causing inside of the system.
Right. So, for some chemicals, the mechanism of action is pretty clear. For others, like we're still trying to figure that out
Yeah.
exactly how they're affecting us. But what we do is we look at, epidemiological data of, large swaths of the population that have high levels of these chemicals. And we're sort of looking for associations, and those associations help point us in the right direction for research that will uncover the mechanism when that research is ultimately done. So this field is pretty emerging, and even though there's just magnitudes more research being published in this topic now than even there was 10 years ago, like there's still a lot we have to learn. But for other chemicals, the mechanisms of action are pretty clear. A little bit scary is that some chemicals can work on lots of different pathways. So for example, you might have a chemical like a phthalate that is a hormone disrupting chemical. It acts as a synthetic estrogen. It interferes with testosterone production. But these chemicals can also indirectly lead to increased risks of cancers through that hormone action. So if we're looking at like estrogen dependent breast cancers or ovarian cancers, the research suggests that these increases in synthetic estrogens like phthalates can lead to increased risk of breast cancers, ovarian, uterine cancers, etc., as well as other estrogen dominant conditions like PCOS, uterine fibroids, endometriosis. So,
Infertility.
Infertility for sure. And so there, in some instances, there's a very direct link or mechanism of action. And then for many others, it's very indirect. So for example, if we're looking at chemicals like, flame retardants, for example, that are typically
On couches, or
yes,
on
on couches,
carpets, or on
yes.
bedding, or like actual mattresses.
Yeah, they're not typically found in mattresses
okay,
anymore, thankfully. Certainly it's still possible, but most
not in my mattress, that's for sure.
yeah,
We have an
certainly
organic
not.
mattress. Yes, but naming things, I probably there are a couple things in my home that have flame retardant materials.
Yeah, and that's
unfortunately.
the average home has that.
Yeah.
But, so these chemicals can be linked to developmental issues in children, partly because they suppress thyroid function. And reduced thyroid function during pregnancy leads to negative outcomes in the children. So things like reduced IQ, increased risk of developmental disabilities, even things like increased risk of autism because maternal thyroid is low. And so it's not that the flame retardant is directly causing some kind of neurological issue. It's that it's dropping the levels of thyroid hormone in the body or interfering with thyroid production. And that is the cause. So oftentimes we do have these indirect ways that these chemicals can affect us. But certainly one of the areas that has the largest sort of most robust body of data is around endocrine disruption. So these are just chemicals that interfere with the normal functioning of our hormone system or endocrine system. People think hormones, they think, oh, estrogen, testosterone, and that's it. But it's like every hormone. It's thyroid hormone, it's leptin and ghrelin. These are the hormones that, tell your body like, I'm full. I'm not full.
And the most important hormones, really, because in order for us to function, we need a good running metabolism.
Yes.
We need nutrient uptake. That is also ran by these hormones. I mean, when we think about the hormone system, these are what I call power players for us, because honestly, we're not able to, mitochondria can't do their job. Our cells can't have the energy that they need if we didn't have these hormones working for us in a way that are efficient and functional.
Right. I think that's probably why this body of endocrine disrupting chemicals has the largest and most robust research behind it, is because, once we recognize that, this molecule looks almost exactly like our body's estradiol molecule, then we start going, and we know estradiol is a very potent sex hormone, and we know all of the things that it can help control or regulate.
Yeah.
And then we have all these mimics, these xenoestrogens or foreign estrogens or xenobiotics, however we want to phrase them, that come in and they can interfere with normal levels of production of those hormones. They can, they're like a masquerade party, not a fun party, but a masquerade party.
Not a fun masquerade. Like party crashers.
Yeah, exactly. Like a party crasher, where they come in and they bump out a normal estradiol molecule from docking or whatever. And so this is part of the problem. But the other thing that we have to consider, and this is not just specific to endocrine disruption, and this is what we're going to get into, is like, how do we reduce our load? How do we do this everyday detox thing? Is that some of these chemicals interfere with the very organs and the very processes that are necessary to deal with toxic exposures. So if we have chemicals that are interfering with liver function, or that are interfering with these different pathways of detoxification, then we are sort of adding fuel to the fire there. It's a double whammy. And so there's just so many different ways that we can be affected. And what's interesting is that different people can be exposed to the same exact exposures, but have a totally different outcome from those exposures.
Totally, which makes it hard to measure too.
Yes.
And I think that has a lot to do with other resilience or other things that we may be doing, or maybe epigenetics are playing a major role here. I mean, clearly it gets very complicated. Someone's gut may be a lot healthier than someone else's gut. Someone's liver, maybe they didn't drink for 10 years prior to that moment. And maybe the other person had 5 shots of tequila the night before.
Right.
Like, you think about all the different factors that play into that moment of exposure. I can imagine it feeling very difficult to measure and figure out what's going on.
And it is. And this is where, we butt up against the limits of epidemiology, because we can only kind of make these inferences and see these associations, and then spend, many, many years going down each one of those rabbit holes to see if we can find an answer. And that's the job of science, right? Like, that's what science is for, is to figure those things out. So we still have a lot to learn, but I think the body of evidence, particularly around endocrine disrupting chemicals, is pretty significant. And there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these chemicals that are already recognized as being actual or suspected of being able to mess with our hormones. And what's concerning is, just to add another layer to the complexity conversation of doing this research, is that, we're not exposed to a single chemical at a time. Nothing happens in isolation. So even if you pick up a bottle of shampoo, you might see, 30 different chemicals in there, maybe 4 or 5 of them are questionable, but that's just one product. And so all of these research that we have is typically on individual chemicals and how it affects this mechanism. But what the research that has looked at, like, what happens if we have, this endocrine disrupting chemical and this endocrine disrupting chemical together, what they find is that there's this compounding cumulative effect. So 1 + 1 does not equal 2, 1 + 1 might equal 5. So it's this sort of amplification. And that, what that tells us is that most of the research that we have is like sort of a gross underestimation of what the potential impact is.
Woo, we're gonna switch gears. So definitely on top of the other, clearly lots of ways in which these toxins are playing a role. Like you said, not only are they disrupting, and most importantly, where we're seeing, I guess I'm assuming the biggest impact is when they're actually disrupting the very organs that are meant to remove toxins from the system. I think that's that overload.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a big, that's a definitely and very important factor, because it's just making the situation worse and making us less resilient and less able to deal with things that, we theoretically should be able to deal with.
Theoretically,
yeah.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about top places of exposure, at least for my ladies. Clearly, we talk a lot about estrogen metabolites. We talk a lot about the liver getting its booty handed to her. Clearly brain function, we see brain fog and
Yes.
as a side effect of inflammation inside of the brain. Then gut issues are happening. All of these things really adding up and creating chronic conditions over time. Any other places, I mean, and then cells. I always tell people disease is cellular. This is all happening on a cellular level. Every little cell is just trying to get by and keep its little home tidy. And when it's not able to do so, that's when we really start to see problems.
Yeah, and so certainly there's a long, giant list of chemicals that, seem to directly target mitochondrial function and damage our mitochondria. And if we don't have energy production in our cells and our tissues and organs, then like the whole ship is going down at that point. Maybe
Absolutely.
not sinking, but it's certainly struggling, right?
The whole ship is requiring coffee at 11 and then 2 and then 5 and then 9, just to get through the day. That's what's happening with the ship, is that it's needing more caffeine to get through the day.
Yep.
Ultimately, I think a lot of people don't realize the role of mitochondria, which is you and I just looking at each other right now requires mitochondrial energy. All of the automatic responses in the system, you breathing, your digestive system working for you, whether you know it or not, that all requires mitochondrial energy. And so it's no surprise that probably one of the biggest symptoms of toxic overload or any type of toxic exposure is over time getting tired, fatigue,
and
exhaustion.
Brain fog,
yes.
Yeah. So what I want people to get is that it's not just toxicity that are causing these issues. It's just a piece of the conversation. So the crappy diet, the staying up until 1 on your cell phone on Facebook, like all of those things are not helping either. Just being in fight or flight chronic stress because of the world we live in, all of those things are certainly compounding together. But I like to focus on the toxicity part because it doesn't seem that very many people are. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. When I think about root causes, I talk a lot about that in the podcast, and I name off some of the big heavy hitting root causes. But what I think is such a big driver to some of those root causes, so gut dysbiosis, toxins, nutrient deficiencies, toxins, right? And co-infections. Absolutely driven by toxins. A bacteria and a virus sees a compromised body and they're going to go after it. So whatever type of co-infections that may look like, the intangibles that I talk about that toxins could absolutely play a role on to some degree is going to be the perceived chronic stress and trauma. Those are things that are coming in. It's not like we can just change the shampoo and those are gone. I wish I could shampoo and grease smoothie myself out of the trauma I have dealt with as a child, but that's not going to happen. But still, when I look at some of those big root causes that I talk about all the time, and mind you, toxins are on that list and heavy metals are on that list as well, and they are the toxins. But their toxic exposure is massive drivers of a lot of those other root causes unfolding in the body.
Yep. Yeah. And Dr. Joseph Pizzorno, who's the founder of Bastyr University and a leading voice in the environmental medicine space, has said that toxicity is the primary driver of disease. That this is actually what's underscoring, just like you said, whether it's a gut dysbiosis or an immune system issue or, a neurological issue or a hormonal issue, any of these things. What's fascinating to me when we're looking at it through the research lens is there's no control. So normally in research, we have like an exposed population and an unexposed population. We don't even have that because the CDC does, and other countries around the world do these biomonitoring tests, and they show that, in the majority of people, between like 90, 98, 99% of people, these chemicals are in their bodies. And so there's no control. There's no way to say like, aha. So we don't really actually even
There's not like a little teeny community that was
there is.
In a cave somewhere where they were not exposed to any McDonald's. They had no Coca-Cola. Goodness knows Coca-Cola is proliferated around this world. Yeah. Yes, there is one.
So there is, and maybe there's a couple of small, religious communities, but there was an article published years ago. I think it was in like Slate or something like that. The title of the article was "Want to Avoid Toxic Chemicals? Drop Out of Modern Society." Yes. And the article was featuring a community of Old Order Mennonites. Like an Amish sect that, doesn't use personal care products. They don't use these chemical household cleaners. They don't, drive in cars that are plastic. They don't buy all this stuff. your
not
food
exposed
doesn't
to
spray for
exhaust.
pesticides. Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
have, so like they're our control.
Yes. All right. We go. So there's a group, and honest, so interesting. Like that's a group that's actually within modern culture. I was thinking of
Yes.
like the Brazil Amazon,
No.
or somewhere deep in the depths of like the rainforest where we can't even find them. But no, and maybe they're drinking Coca-Cola, unfortunately.
I would
But
hope that they're not,
yeah.
but fingers crossed.
Okay, so luckily there's a tiny bit of a control out there that we can look at. I mean, you know it, I know it, we all know it, that we are unknowingly being exposed to toxins. So many of us, we feel like crap. Girl, if I have to get into another lift where someone is dumping fragrance, Glade fragrance on me, I swear to God, I'm gonna throw a fit. Like I have turned cars down because I tell them, I'm like, I can't. I will you're going to trigger up a migraine for me. I just want to speak to that really quick. It's like a personal kind of selfish question. Like, so when I was growing up as a little girl, once upon a time, it was my job to clean. I think we've even had this conversation, but it was my job to clean the tub. And we had common. Girl, we had common and ammonia, like the big old jug of ammonia and the blue, the nasty. So I knew that if I wasn't able to get out of that bathroom within about 5 minutes, I would trigger up a migraine. Before that, I'd had a lot of head trauma, so migraines were very prevalent for me, and toxins were one of my massive triggers. And it was a I felt like I was playing chicken with the chemicals at any given day of the week, and oftentimes I lost the battle. Like I always got these migraines, and I'll be honest with you, still to this day, I have been so sensitive to particularly smells, synthetic smells.
Right. Yep.
I will get triggered into a headache or a migraine of some sort. Now I hear that, that when you have that level of sensitivity, is it that you just have, because we've done a really great job of removing a lot of chemicals from our house. We use a lot of organic, all the things. Is it that when you, let's say you reduce your toxic exposure, at least within your home environment, or you've removed fragrances from your house, are you more sensitive to those synthetic, like if I walk by Bed Bath & Beyond, it is over. Like, you just like, I walk on the other side of the mall. Or is it that someone who's got maybe a higher level of toxicity have more sensitivity?
I think it actually can be both.
Okay.
And so it could be that there's like some, you have some genetic polymorphism. That means that you're not as good at detoxifying certain compounds. So that might be a problem. It could just be that there's a sluggish liver, or there's just some incapacity or reduced capacity to detoxify. And that's why you have that immediate response. And it could be that you just, it's like our palates change. If somebody eats junk food and Roy Rogers and French fries, of course, healthy food is going to taste bland, right? Because they're being hyper exposed to these chemicals and hyper processed foods. And it takes them a while to change their palate and adjust to healthy eating. And then they go back to eat those foods and they're like, oh my God, that's so healthy.
It tastes like plastic.
Right. And so I wonder if that sort of same thing happens in our bodies when we reduce our exposures to these chemicals, that we just become more sensitive, which I actually think is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, I
like,
think particularly fragrance too, in particular, when we switched all the way over to essential oils, like any fragrance was just, even Alex, like I would say he's far less sensitive than I am, but it's just like, oh, hell no. It's just immediately. And I always think about terms of food. I remember my mom came over the other day, and I've done this to a lot of friends on accident, but we only buy green juice. Like there is no apple in it, girl. It is parsley, cilantro, and greens, like maybe lemon and ginger if you're lucky. And so every time I've given, so someone's like, I'm like, would you like a green juice? And every time they literally, they spit it out. A friend that you may know, we were in Vegas, and I wasn't drinking. I was just drinking green juices, and we were all together. And she just looked, I was drinking this juice, and she was looking at me like, are you going to let me have some? And I was like, okay, it's green. So she drank it. She may have been a little tipsy, and like she literally just spit it out. I was like, all right. And so a lot of people, it just reminds me of like how different our palates can be. And I always tell people, you gotta work up to that level of green juice.
Yes, for certain. But, I think that being sensitive to it has its pros and cons, right? Like it's annoying because we're like, get on an airplane and we're sitting, some person next to us is doused in cologne, and we're like, right? Yeah. So, but on the other hand, like, I think these are warnings, right? Like these are warnings. We don't get those kinds, you don't get a migraine from walking into a cow pasture, even though it's very fragrant and strong smelling because of cow poop, right? Like we don't get migraines triggered that way. But you walk into a Bed Bath and Beyond, and that might be a trigger for you because these are, you know, what you're smelling are solvents. What you're smelling are chemicals that have off-gas, semi-volatile and volatile organic compounds that are directly entering your bloodstream immediately because inhalation is the fastest way to get something into your body.
Tell them, girl.
Aside from an injection, like that's the fastest way to get something into your bloodstream. And so it's no wonder that people have very immediate responses to, if they're sensitive to things like fragrances, as opposed to people that, you know, maybe don't react to fragrances the same way. But it, you know, that makes sense for people that are sensitive, they're going to have an immediate reaction.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. I mean, I'm loving up on this liver every day. I'm not going to lie. I probably did some damage to this liver earlier in my lifetime. But yes, we're just really mindful. And what I appreciate, although definitely a concern in terms of like, am I hypersensitive because I'm at a threshold and I'm really mindful of that. But I really do appreciate the fact that my body immediately tells me stranger danger. Like, this is not where you should be right now. There is way too much nasty nasty in the air. And it's so interesting. I have a really great sense of smell because I can't see or hear. And I always just assume it's because I can't see or hear. Clearly, we know our sense of smell is way stronger than our sight, our touch, and our ability to hear. But I'll walk into a room, I'll walk into anywhere, and I can immediately pick something up. And Alex is just like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm not with cigarette smoke. I can smell.
Oh my gosh. I can smell it like a mile away. I'm like, and I'm just starting, where is it? Where is, I start to freak out. I hate cigarettes.
Yeah, same. I mean, in this day and age, I just literally, every time I see somebody smoking, I'm like, it's 2020. Like,
oh my goodness. Oh, if I'm working out or running and you're smoking, better be careful. I don't have like something on me to hit you with. Anyway, let's go into, girl, what can we do? Yes. Let's get into, what can we, okay, you have scared me enough. I want to know, and I mean, it's immediate. Like I start thinking about, I know that as much as we've done really great work in the house, clearly there's furniture and there's things in this house that, you know, and we off-gas everything. Everything goes into the garage. Everything goes outside well before. Right. And it blows my mind how much people have never heard of that concept of off-gassing. And I don't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole, but that's how mindful we're always being. Yeah. How do we even start? Because I know that's the rabbit hole that we talked about where people are like, la, 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 la. I don't want to know about this because I don't want to even think about what it's going to take for me to actually start making these changes.
Right. So I really, like, I have refined this more and more over the years in talking to people and doing, you know, sharing this information with people and seeing how overwhelmed they get, is that I think the easiest place to start is with what's free and easy, right? Like, what's free?
Free and easy. What's air?
Yeah. Well, because you know, the reality is, like we were talking, mattresses, couches, not everybody can afford to go out and, you know, completely refurnish their homes, nor do they want to. They may not even need to. And so we don't want to just tell people scary stuff about what's in their furniture and then say, well, it's going to cost you $2,000 to fix that, because then people are going to go, oh my God, being healthy is impossible. And so we don't want to do that. We want to show people what are some meaningful things that we can do that's free and that are easy. And so the number one thing that I encourage people to do that's not only free, but will ultimately save you money is just stop buying scented candles, air fresheners, plugins, sprays. Just stop buying them and throw out what you have. Right?
Yes, please.
All of those, yes. And
before I come over.
Yes. I'm like, and if you're a Lyft driver, get rid of the dang.
I don't know. Are there really that many stinky people driving in Lyft cars? Like, because I don't understand why. And I just feel so bad for Lyft drivers because I'm like, you are literally
it's not a directive from Lyft. It's just a choice, personal choice from the driver.
Oh man,
I've convinced a couple to get rid of them, but you know, who knows what they do when I get out of the car.
I cannot tell you. I have, you know, my full confession is like when I go to my workouts or I go, honestly, even I've done it when I've gone to people's homes, I have literally thrown the glades away. I was like, I'm doing you a favor by throwing this away behind the scene. Mostly just gyms I've done it with. And when I've talked to the girls in the front, they just look at me like there's a fish, like I put some type of mask on. Like I'm like, they just look at me like I'm crazy is basically what happened. And I'm like, you don't understand. You guys are just sitting in this you know, every single day. And it's just it's just so nasty.
Yeah, it's terrible. So the easiest thing to do is to just stop buying those, throw them out. The next easy thing to do is to open your windows. And
Yes.
I think people don't recognize how bad the air inside their home is. They just don't, because you kind of become nose deaf, I think is the expression. Like, you don't smell the things that you smell because you're just used to that's your house smell. But what people don't realize is that the air quality inside your home can be significantly worse than what's happening outside. Even though we think like, oh, there's trucks and cars and pollution, the air inside is often worse because we have all these materials that are off-gassing. And just because you can't smell something doesn't mean it's not off-gassing. So some furniture, some paint, paints, things like that, they'll off-gas forever. There's no point at which they're done off-gassing. And so, yeah, that doesn't exist. Or it might be decades, right? And then, no one's sitting there looking at the clock going, is it done yet? Because then you're bringing new stuff in all the time. And so all of these chemicals that off-gas get trapped in our house. And like I said earlier, the fastest way for chemicals to enter our bloodstream is through inhalation, and that's just us wandering around our homes. So we want to improve our indoor air quality, and we do that by no longer bringing in things that pollute the indoor air, and that's a longer process. We do the best that we can, but again, we start with don't bring in the scented candles and air fresheners, and get rid of the Febreze sprays and even those Reed diffusers. The oil that they sit in is just synthetic chemicals. So if you want your house to smell like anything, essential oils or flowers, that's it. And then you open your windows. Even in the winter, I have my windows open at least, half an hour every day for air exchange. I want the air inside my house to go out, and I want air from outside to come in. And, that actually started to become a problem in the 1970s when people began to build homes with a focus on energy efficiency. And so now we have all these like really tightly sealed homes. People have central air, they don't open their windows, and that can become a problem. So that's actually a really easy way to, just make a habit of opening all the windows in the morning. I've heard some people they just open all the windows, and then by the time they get back to the beginning, they just start closing them all, just so that you've got 10 or 15 minutes of good air circulation. The next one is take your shoes off at the front door. Like, these don't seem like they're meaningful, right? Like, who cares? Like, how's that going to help me be healthier? We track in all kinds of pesticides, heavy metals, all kinds of, it's not just like dog poo. It's not dirt. Like, the dirt is probably the least of the problems. It's all the other stuff that comes along with it. And if we have carpeting in our home, which most people do, even if it's not wall to wall, you're just tracking all those chemicals into the carpet where they get stuck and where they live. The carpets become like a container for all of these toxins. And so, like, let's just do a simple behavior of take our shoes off at the front door and don't wear them into the house, especially if there's babies or children, because they're the ones that are crawling around on the floor, and they have higher levels of exposures of a lot of these chemicals because of that. So those are 3 free, easy things that people can do every single day to help start reducing exposure. From there, when we're looking at proactive interventions, I really emphasize the consumption of organic food as much as is possible with someone's budget. To me, it's just a non-negotiable, because so many of those pesticide residues are endocrine disrupting, neurotoxic, carcinogenic, reproductive toxins. And so, this is something that we're putting into our bodies every single day. And we want that food to give us the fuel to actually be able to better handle toxins. So not only do the foods need to be organic, but they need to be nutrient dense. So they need to, you got to eat the rainbow. You got to eat, your 6 to 9 cups of vegetables every single day. Like, these to me are non-negotiables, and it's surprising to see how little fruits and vegetables that people eat. So I look at that not only as a mechanism for reducing exposures, but also amplifying our body's ability to do its job, right? So that's the everyday detox that I like to talk about, because we detox every day. And eating the right kinds of foods facilitate that process.
Got it. Absolutely.
So,
and then how about water?
Yeah. So water is actually, it is huge. It's usually not first on my list.
No, because it's expensive.
Because it's more expensive,
yes.
Right? If people, the cost is not an issue, then yeah, go filter your water straight away, and filter appropriately. I ended up having to create a whole course on this topic because I got so many questions. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times got the same question: what kind of water filter should I buy? Everyone's water is different. There is no perfect one single filter that does everything. And why spend, $700 when $200 might fit the bill? You really do have to look at what's in your water first, because everyone has different contaminants. But yeah, filtering your water is pretty key, but it's not the first thing if people are like concerned about how much they're going to have to spend.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
And then from there, that's really where I start looking deeper into the kitchen. Because again, the kitchen is like the room that it's easiest for people to, I think, associate with being healthy is the kitchen, right? So let's just kind of make it easier and point them in that direction. So, making sure that you're not using plastics in direct contact with your food. That means like, swapping out those plastic food storage containers with glass. That means looking at, kind of doing an inventory of where is plastic being used in your kitchen. We don't want to be afraid of plastic. Plastic has, has certainly made our lives better and easier. It will always exist in our homes. We just don't want it in contact with our food if possible. Mm-hmm. And so, that's actually a significant exposure source to the phthalates and the bisphenols, the BPA, BPS, BPF, that people more commonly are aware of as they're coming from these plastic materials. And so we don't want to put our food in contact with those. That means, we don't put plastics in the microwave. We don't put plastics in the dishwasher because it's really, really hot. Caustic in there with the dishwasher detergent. And so we just want to be mindful of how we're using plastics in the kitchen. From there, we can look at our cookware. Might be a bigger investment for people to swap out. Certainly doesn't have to be expensive. And then once we've there's a couple other areas in the kitchen, food packaging and stuff like that, and canned food consumption that you can kind of minimize buying food in cans, canned soup, canned tomatoes. They will be significant exposure sources to bisphenol chemicals. And then from there, looking at personal care products, which is a big category to be certain. So, just picking one thing at a time, one product at a time. What I like to tell people is, when your foundation runs out, now's a great time to swap it with something safer and better that doesn't have these phthalates, that doesn't have, these parabens and other endocrine disrupting chemicals in them. You don't have to throw everything out and kind of start fresh. If somebody wants to do that, fine. But, it can be costly. And so I say, look, if it takes 6 months or 6 years, so long as you're moving in this progressive direction forward of reducing your exposures, great. I'm going to add one more thing in the free and easy category that I didn't think of, is saying no to cash register receipts.
Yes.
It's a huge one. It's a huge one, right? So cash register receipts are coated with bisphenol chemicals because the powder is so fine, and that's actually a powder coating on the paper. It absorbs really, really quickly into our hands. If we then are snacking on food that we buy after picking that receipt up, then we're increasing that exposure, and those exposures can be significant. So, all of those steps that I just walked through, like I said, it might take somebody 6 months to go through those, but it's like we just want to start making systematic changes that will help to reduce what we're being exposed to. Now, at the same time that we're working on reducing what we're exposed to, we also want to amplify our ability to actually get rid of the things that we can't avoid and the things that are already in us. And this is where the everyday detox conversation comes in. So I'm happy to kind of dive into that, because I know that action can be just as important and can be really, really powerful in helping people start to feel better wherever they are on their sort of healing journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a couple more minutes, honey. So give us a couple pointers.
All right. So one is get those 6 to 9 cups of veggies in, because that not only is going to give your body the nutrients it needs to break down those toxins in your liver and get them out of the body, but they're going to add enough fiber in bulk that you are going to be assured, hopefully, to be pooping at least once a day, which is like, if you're not pooping, that you're not detoxing at all. Like that's, maybe not at all, but you're severely compromised. And what happens is, as that, poop kind of gets stuck in your body, your body's reabsorbing those toxins. So you want to get that out. If you're not pooping, nothing else is, you know, more important than getting that train
Yes.
rolling. Get that
Yes.
train rolling and out of the station. And so pooping every day, you can do things like sauna therapy, getting in the sauna every single day, or at least a couple times a week if you can, is excellent. We excrete so many different chemicals through our sweat. And in fact, some chemicals excrete preferentially through sweat rather than urine. So people think, oh, I'll pee it out. No, you actually need to sweat it out. That's how you get rid of some of these chemicals. So doing sauna therapy regularly, and then even doing things like dry brushing is a great way to move lymph fluid through your body. This is one of our systems of detoxification. And the lymph doesn't have a pump like our heart does. It moves when we move. So that means exercise, and that means things like dry brushing, which help move that fluid through the lymph nodes where they can, you know, that waste can be processed. And you know, those things are just really critically important.
I love them. Those are easy things.
Duo.
Yes, those are easy things.
Yes.
Laura, honey, now that we've got at least a starting place, right? Not only in what we can do externally, but also what we can do to love our body every single day. That combination, hopefully helping to reduce the amount of toxic load we're dealing with. Where else can we plug into you? Because I know you've got so many great resources. I mean, girl, you are a plethora of resources.
Yeah, so if people just want to kind of learn more and lurk over my shoulder into this conversation, they can check out my Instagram, which is @environmentaltoxinsnerd. I've got a ton of great information over there. And for anybody who happens to be listening, who's a health professional or somebody who's super motivated, they can come check out my courses at laraadler.com.
Perfect. All right. We will make sure we'll have all of those links inside. I love your Instagram. I love the content is so consumable. It gives a lot of food for thought as well. And I love that you inspire people with that, because it's the little things that kind of stick into our minds that really begin to have us take those action steps to creating a healthier body, not only for us, but for our families.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, honey, for jumping on. Girl, you are amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you.